Hello everyone, and kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Abdullah Muhammad Nawi, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Canterbury, New Zealand, and also a lecturer at the University of Technology, Malaysia. Just a little bit about me before we move on. I am an English language teaching specialist. I am a teacher trainer, and I have a keen interest in applied drama in English language learning. This paper is a collaboration between me, Abdullah, and my professor, my supervisor, Professor Nawi Greenwood from the University of Canterbury. And this paper is entitled Staging the Textbook, Supplementing the ESL Textbook with Drama. In teaching English as a second language, I've seen that there are many differences between different countries. Now, I've taught English in three different countries. I've taught English in the UK, I've taught English in Malaysia, and I've taught English in New Zealand, and I've also taught teachers in Malaysia and also to a certain extent in New Zealand as well. And what I have found is that there is a difference in the approach to teaching English as a second language. For example, in New Zealand, ESOL is not taught as a subject, as a component by itself, but rather it is taught as a supplementary component where the ESOL teacher decides what is best for the students. The ESOL teacher uses plans, develops his or her own teaching resources, teaching materials, and so on. But this is not the case in many Asian countries. In fact, I think in most Asian countries, and especially in my own context in Malaysia, teaching English has always been very organized. It's English as a second language is in fact its own subject, and because it's its own subject, it's got its own syllabus, it's got its own curriculum, and so on and so forth. And how this is taught is usually via the textbook. Now, the characteristics of a textbook, well, first of all, a textbook covers the syllabus in an organized manner, so you have everything you need to learn in that year, and it is presented in the textbook. Next, the learning is cyclical, and it builds on previously learned knowledge and skills. So if I learnt something in year one, then I'd learn an extension of it in year two, and presumably I'd master that in year two, and I'd learn an extension of it in year three. And so learning is cyclical, and learning is also theoretically scaffolded. Now, this, in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, this is what is supposed to happen. And this is why having a textbook is great, because you know what you're supposed to teach. And as a teacher in a Malaysian context, this is what you've got to teach. If you teach something else, then at the end of the day, when the students face the exams and they don't know what they're supposed to learn and they fail the exams, then it's your head on a plate. However, there is this mindset of textbooks being boring. Now, I've seen quite a mixture of textbooks. You've got good textbooks, and you've got bad textbooks, and you've got textbooks that are sort of good, but the presentation is so dull that it just puts you to sleep. And this is the situation that many teachers have to deal with every day. So there's this mindset, and also some of the materials, some of the sections may not be totally relevant to the learning context. It follows a one-size-fits-all approach, which may be a problem in a country like Malaysia, where it is a multicultural country. And of course, in the syllabus, there is this agenda of national integration, and they do try to put in as much as possible the values, the cultural learning between the different races in Malaysia. But it still is not tailored specifically to the learning context. And number 3, it may be too hard or too easy. So what I mean by this is, for example, in a rural context, and if you're supposed to be learning if the class is a Form 3 class, and if their language is not even at a Form 1 level, how can you teach them the Form 3 book? They would have no clue whatsoever, no inkling of what any of it means, and you would have wasted your time if you keep on trying to teach them something that they're not ready to learn. So what some teachers do is, now this is through my own experience teaching and through my own observations, observing teachers in training as well. So what I have seen people do, and what I used to do myself at times, are the following. Number 1, it's some teachers, they stick to the textbook. It's there, so they say use it, don't reinvent the wheel. Why should I change something that works? Why should I change something that's supposed to guide me, supposed to guide the students towards answering proper exam questions? And then you've got the other camp who step away from the textbook and they say, the textbook is boring, I can't use it. So what do I do? Or what do? They heavily supplement the textbook. They bring in outside materials which may be thematically the same, but still may not have been carefully designed. Now, this is one of the pitfalls that I have seen when teachers try to adapt materials. They do not have enough experience to actually make sure that what they do, what they replace, effectively teaches what they are supposed to teach. So teachers do, and some teachers, they teach according to what they feel best. And now this it may suit learners, but puts the learning cycle out of balance. Some teachers, they jump sections, they go forwards, they go backwards, they add, they subtract, and they do this and they think, this is interesting, I should do this next, but they put little thought into the effect of what they're doing on a larger scale. They don't realise that when they muck about with structure, they actually muck about with the learning, and because the structure of the textbook has been put in place in a certain order, in a certain way, because it's scaffolding learning. So when you jump scaffolds, what you do in effect is you don't really support the learning that's supposed to happen. And this is a very big problem. And so we come finally to the research question. With all that I've said in mind, our research question I wanted to find out is, how can the ESL textbook be supplemented in a way that is engaging and motivating to the students, achieve the desired learning outcomes set by the syllabus, and yet does not require the teacher to completely overhaul the textbook, spend hours on additional preparation, because Lord knows as teachers we've got so much on our plates already, and does not require the teacher to jumble learning objectives that have been carefully laid out and addressed in the textbook. So this is the main research question, with those sub-questions that I wanted to investigate. The following is some of the theory that I have used to ground my paper in, and I'm not going to elaborate on every single one, but I'm just going to focus on a few. I think one of the most important names here is Richards in 1993. Now, Richards offers a balanced view on the pros and cons related to using the textbook, though he greatly cautions against teachers' over-dependence on them. However, he retains that, now, in quotation, at the same time, effective instructional materials in language teaching are based on theoretically sound learning principles, arouse and maintain the learner's interest and attention, are appropriate to the learner's needs, background, and level, provide examples of how language is used, provide meaningful activities for learners, and provide opportunities for authentic language use. Now, this is on page 13. This is also supplemented by Bax in 2002. Bax talks about how context is very often overlooked in teaching of CLT. That's basically the teaching method used in Malaysia, which is communicative language teaching. Now, it's a very good method of teaching, which has come under fire, but at the same time has been redeemed. But I'm not a theorist, but what I do know is that some of the materials may be considered as inappropriate for certain contexts, and I believe truly in what Bax says. Context is very, very important. And context brings us to the heart of this study. Now, why is it that I named it Staging the Textbook? Well, I've already established that the textbook is a good teaching document, but it requires context. And how I propose to do this is by incorporating the other element that I enjoy the most besides language, which is drama. And how to do this is to inject context through drama into the textbook, and that's why I named it Staging the Textbook. Now, I propose two models of staging the textbook. Number one is the adjunct model, and number two is the integrated model. With the adjunct model, teaching is done hand in hand with normal ESL lessons, and where parts that are felt important to be taught as a language lesson are taught as thus. So, for example, if the teacher wants to teach some grammar points in context, in isolation, not exactly in isolation, but rather a grammar lesson. Within context, of course. Now, it would be taught as a grammar lesson, and speaking and listening lessons can be taught as listening, and so on and so forth. And the drama element is added on to the normal lessons. Now, the good thing is that there is less drama planning. It may be better suited for language teachers who are beginning to use drama pedagogy, so that they can familiarize themselves with the basic forms of drama instead of going on to the more sophisticated process drama forms and mantle of the expert forms and so on. And it also allows for explicit language teaching. And this can be very, very important in an education system where you're tested, where standardized testing plays a very big role, and it is better suited for scaffolding or even pre-production. Now, the integrated model, on the other hand, requires more drama planning, and it's better suited for teachers with more drama experience, where everything is taught in a context. Basically, you're not in a language classroom, you're somewhere else, and you're using somewhere else as a context, what's happening as a context, where you are as a context, to teach the language. So what you're trying to do is actually to create incidental language teaching, and this requires a lot of work. However, it is perhaps the most interesting form of teaching language. Next, This brings us to the question, how do we stage a textbook? And I propose 4 steps. The first, refer to the syllabus. This is the heart of every teaching session. What is it in the syllabus that you want to achieve today? What are your objectives? And next you refer to the scheme of work, which should give you more detail in how you want to achieve this. And the next step is, once you know what you want to teach, you have to distill the textbook. You have to know the essence from the textbook that you want to supplement. So you would want to take, let's say for example, in Unit 1, and a specific grammar point that you want to teach in Unit 1. You have to know what that unit is. So you distill from that. You take what is important, then you build your unit, and then of course the next part is you inject the drama and you stage a textbook. Now, when staging the textbook, look for context-setting opportunities. Every single thing, or any single thing you can. Look for a story. Look for tension, especially. Look for language elements that can be incorporated in the setting, within the language used by the characters, within the language used in the stimuli, in the text, and storing the tension, which you'll see in the next slide. Questions to ask: is there a story in this? Like, if there is a unit on, for example, the example that I give on the internet, for example, what sort of story can be created from the internet? How can I make it interesting? Is there a pivotal point where a story can be devised? Who are the characters? Are there any problems that can be created from the context? And this is very important, because as you set the problem, you set the objectives of the drama. So problem solving is an essential tool that the teacher can use, and Gardner puts problem solving as a crux in multiple intelligences. And can the problems lead to discussion-based activities, communication, practice? The case study was done in Malaysia, and the context of the study is an ESL context. It was a rural school, mainly Malay Muslim, and the students were of lower proficiency. Technically, they had been learning English for years, ever since they were the kids were 16-year-olds, but they had been learning English since they were 7, and by right should be at a level which is acceptable. But the reality is that in their context, the community itself doesn't engage in English, doesn't use English, and in fact, if you use English outside the classroom, you'd actually be considered as somebody who's showing off, and this becomes detrimental to the students' learning process in learning English altogether. So this is the context in which I had to work in. And the textbook is this textbook written in the text, and the unit that I want to focus on was chapter 14, the Internet, Uses and Abuses. As I had indicated before, at the heart of every teaching session is the syllabus, the learning objectives. Why are they doing this? And so the next 2 slides give you an overview of what the unit wanted the teacher to teach. And in a normal classroom setting, using the textbook, this would automatically be on the textbook pages themselves. So what we had to do, me and my collaborator had to do, was to work in these objectives into our drama component. In the following slides, I give an example of how I carried out this unit, the unit on the internet. Now, to start things off, on the first page, which can be seen in the following slide, is a picture of the textbook. And as you can see, basically what it has is it's got pictures, keywords there and so on, and it just says, study the pictures above carefully. Each of them shows something that can be done by the internet, and gives points to ponder on where the students can discuss with their friends or think about it themselves. And so this activates the schemata of the students. Now, how I would do this by staging the textbook is I would play a teacher in role as somebody who's clueless about the internet, maybe an old person, maybe somebody who's new to planet Earth or something, and I'd build a background story as to why the knowledge of the internet is important to this person, and then I would use the questions, the same questions, but now the students have a context, they've got a purpose in which they have to answer these questions. Some more examples can be found in the following slides. So, for example, in Task A, you have an internet addiction test where the task is discuss. Task B, you have a reading text. You have reading text and answer comprehension questions discussed. Task C, fill in the boxes, which is a summary, and Task D is a non-linear presentation, so graphs and figures. So they're all good. They're all communicative in a certain way, but at the same time, they don't utilize context. So what do I do to stage a textbook? I introduce a context, and here what I did was the students were investigative reporters, and I was the editor of a newspaper company. So the students were given task A, and this led on to other things, and I introduced a story, which I will talk about in a later slide. And the students prepare for investigation. They read the reading text as part of an investigation in role. And so, as you can see, what I've done is I've introduced a context. Now, this, of course, is very familiar to people who work with process drama. However, the difference between the context of these people and this context is these drama practitioners would normally be teaching to English as a first language to native English speakers, whereas in this particular context, we, or I, had to grapple with the fact that I was teaching English as a foreign, as a second or a foreign language, and there are very distinct tensions that work against you in this particular context. How much Malay can you allow? How much do you use? Do you use any? Do you let the students use any? How do you get the students to understand? And so on and so forth. So these are some of the things that have to be considered. Just a little bit of elaboration on the story and the conflict that I created. So, as I said, the setting was in a newspaper office, and I was the teacher in role as the editor. And what I did was I told the students that to expect a guest. And so I went away, and I came back, and I wore a traditional hat. and I became this elderly man who was looking for his son who went missing under mysterious circumstances. And further investigation, which was done via hot seating, revealed that the son was very much into Facebook and had met someone online before disappearing. So I created this conflict, this tension, this problem that had to be solved. So what the students had to do was they had to investigate this man and call upon other characters as well via hot seating. So again, techniques that are very familiar to process drama practitioners. However, the preparation that had to be done before this was actually to make sure that the students were able to ask questions properly, were able to use question tags, were able to use WH questions. So all these factors came into play, and these issues, these things that had to be taught earlier on. So I actually shifted between two paradigms, between two different models. So I used the adjunct model to teach particular aspects of language, which was actually done by my partner, by the classroom teacher, and then I used the other model to get into it, to use the actual process drama. So this is what I meant by different tensions working in using drama in a second language context. And so in the next few slides, you can see pictures. The next slide has a picture of me playing the bewildered old man, and next slide has students as investigative reporters. And the next slide has the NTC, or the native teacher collaborator, who was the classroom teacher, and she's enrolled in the hot seat. And this was interesting because she actually became the person who the son was talking to, and before he disappeared. So the students were very interested in who she was and the relationship that she had with the boy, and all sorts of questions were coming. They were really, really interesting, and she herself in character was very interesting as well. And in the next slide, the picture, you can see that after the students had done their investigations, they continued from the classroom, and in another session they went to the computer labs, and they did their research there in the labs, and used the internet, and we used this to create presentations and so on. So there's a lot of developmental learning. There's a lot of output that can be gained through this, and language was injected where necessary. So, like I said, we shifted between the two models, where if something was necessary, where something had to be taught, if a component had to be taught specifically, we would do that, and we were flexible enough to do that out of role. So we didn't confine ourselves just to think, how do I do this as this character? How do I do this as this character, and so on? So the best approach would probably be an amalgamation or switching between the two, because there is no fine line that actually limits you. It is up to you to do what is best for you and your students. There were a few findings that I considered to be relevant, to be spot on to what I was trying to achieve. First of all, was answering the question: could all this be done? Could the objectives of the lesson, of the textbook, be done through drama pedagogy. Could I do what I was supposed to do? Could I teach what I was supposed to teach? And the answer was yes. So, as you saw in the previous slides, where you saw the learning objectives that were supposed to be covered, these were successfully covered. Next, improved engagement and motivation. This is, of course, a no-brainer for most students anyway. Overall, there was improvement of engagement and motivation. The students loved it. They were really interested. And partly because they had never done something like this before and this was a new experience, but partly because it was such an interesting experience. And in conversations, in interviews which were done after after I'd finished teaching them, a lot of the students were hankering to find out the real story. They kept on asking me, so, sir, what happened? What really happened? And I said, well, that's for you to decide, isn't it? And they were like, but we really want to know. So this really shows you that they were really engaged in the whole story, in the whole process. And this can be really utilized very effectively if the teacher knows how to combine story and learning. Next, it was less stressful for the students, and this is very interesting because the students who are concerned with examinations will normally want to focus on doing exam questions, this and that, and so on. Finally, to conclude, the considerations and limitations of the research. First and foremost, to stage a textbook, it is not to burden the teacher, but to provide alternatives using drama pedagogy that are interesting and can utilize what is already there in the textbook. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to burn the midnight oil until we burn ourselves. We use what's already there. What we do, we inject drama, we inject context, but we use what is already there. There are two models, and those two models, the integrated and adjunct, are not mutually exclusive. And I've said before, in many areas they can overlap. It is not a hard science. You make the call. This study is limited to a specific context, which I said is the Malaysian rural school context, and the findings, of course, can't be generalized to a wider context. However, the findings may provide baselines to be used for future research in different contexts. And the study was limited by time, and a longer study will provide more generalizable results. And these are the considerations and limitations, and also the conclusion. Thank you very much.